Hello and welcome to the Cryptid Tier List. In the last Cryptid Tier List video I did, I ranked 100 cryptids based on how likely I thought they were to exist. So in this video, I'm going to be ranking 101 cryptids based on how much I like the cryptid. I'll be ranking them on a S to D scale, S being the best and D being the less best. Let's start off with the Grootslong. So the Grootslong is a cryptid, I believe, that comes from South Africa, and it's said to be a very large snake with an elephant-like head. I'm gonna put this one in C tier because while I think the elephant-like head is sort of a cool detail, it's also kind of ridiculous to me, and it just stands out too much. Next up, I'm going to put mermaids at C tier. I don't know why, but mermaids, the concept of a human-like civilization underwater, just never really interested me that much. Now we have Audubon's mystery birds. So these are a set of 6 birds that were painted by John Audubon. John Audubon was a very famous painter who traveled across America and painted a bunch of different bird species. However, 6 of those species, to this day, have never been officially scientifically recognized, and haven't even been cited, in most cases, by people other than John. Now, normally, these types of historical cryptids really interest me. However, recently, I was sent some information, and it turns out that John Audubon, the person who originally painted these, was actually known to have hoaxed and faked a bunch of different animals. So for that reason, I'm going to bump it down a few tiers to B. Now we have Mantis Man. So Mantis Man is an American cryptid on the East Coast, said to be a large humanoid mantis creature that I believe can also turn invisible. No other comments? I'm putting that at A tier. Now we have the ivory-billed woodpecker. This one is going to be the first S tier cryptid. The debates, the discussions, the scientific inquiries, the government inquiries, the alleged photographic evidence, and just the immense, extremely long history of the ivory-billed woodpecker as a cryptid, going back to the last confirmed sighting in the 1940s, is extremely interesting to me. Ever since I was a kid, even before I knew about cryptozoology, I was hearing discussions about whether or not the ivory-billed woodpecker existed. And I think that history is what makes the ivory-billed woodpecker so interesting to me, even if it is just a woodpecker. So I'm putting that one in S tier. Now we have the Kon-Tiki creatures. So these are a group of cryptids that were sighted only once, I believe, on a trip from South America, I believe Peru specifically, to the Polynesian islands. So these, normally I would just give them an A tier because bioluminescent animals are interesting, but there's not really that much else to them. However, the story behind the Kon-Tiki creatures is really cool to me. They were actually sighted on a trip that was a very controversial trip, scientifically actually, that was supposed to prove that with thousands of year old boat technology, people could sail from Polynesia to South America in an effort to prove that contact between those two civilizations existed. So I'm putting them up here at S tier. Now we have the Ozark Howler. So the Ozark Howler is a large bear-like cryptid that's known for its distinctive howl and is found in the United States, specifically the Ozark regions. However, I'm only going to put this one down here at a C tier because there's not much I don't think there's any photographic evidence for it. And apart from 1 or 2 stories that I found interesting, I just didn't think the Ozark Howler had a lot of interesting history about it either. Now we have the Ahul. So this is a large bat cryptid that is said to be very aggressive and have a monkey-like face, which you can kind of see here. The name Ahul comes from the distinctive call it's said to make, as in the creature has the call of Ahul, like a Pokemon. I'm going to put this one at S tier because I just really like the fact that it's named for the sound it's supposed to make. And I think giant bat cryptids are pretty cool. This one also has a number of interesting things about it besides it just being a giant bat, like the monkey-like face, the distinctive call, and the aggressive behavior. So that one's going in S tier. Now we have air rods, a very controversial cryptid. Well, I think the air rods, by the way, are said to be large atmospheric creatures that usually show up on photographs or videos of the sky. While I think the concept of atmospheric creatures is very interesting, I'm only going to put this one in C tier. And the reason is most of these air rod sightings just kind of look like sticks or random objects to me. If they had more of an interesting look to them, I think they'd rank higher. But when it's just basically a line, it's just not that interesting of a cryptid. Now we have the Loch Ness Monster, probably one of the most famous cryptids ever. However, I'm only going to put this one at A. And the reason is, even though the Loch Ness Monster has a long history, I think a lot of that history just isn't that interesting. There's a couple of interesting things about it. I really liked, even though I believe it's been exposed as a misidentification, but I really liked that alleged photo of the Loch Ness Monster's flipper, and I liked the story where the Loch Ness Monster came out of the lake and crossed a road, according to a couple's eyewitness report. However, and this is the thing with a lot of lake monsters or lake cryptids for me, I just don't find it that interesting. Now we have devil monkeys. So if Bigfoot is a large ape that's said to be in North America, devil monkeys are large monkeys said to be in North America. These ones, I think I'm going to put them in the middle at a B tier. While the concept is interesting, the sightings themselves, to me, just aren't that cool, and I don't believe there's any photographic evidence for them either, so I'm just going to have to put them in B tier. Now we have the Beast of Busco. So this was a cryptid that was sighted for about a year or two in Churubusco, Indiana, in a singular lake, I believe, as well. So the story of Busco goes that they sighted a large snapping turtle that was said to be about, I think, at least 2 to 3 times the largest snapping turtle ever on record in terms of size. I'm putting this one in S tier just because, one, I really like turtles. Turtle cryptids as well are super interesting to me, and if you've ever seen a snapping turtle, they do look pretty terrifying. So I think the concept of a even larger snapping turtle is super cool. Now we have the man, the myth, and the legend Bigfoot. I'm putting this one at S tier. Bigfoot, even, years, decades later, I still think Bigfoot is an extremely fascinating and interesting concept. I still do hope one day it gets discovered, and the amount of photographic evidence for it, the calls it's said to make, the calls that were recorded of it, the videos of Bigfoot. As you can see, there's a still here from the very famous Patterson-Gimlin tape. Bigfoot still, to this day, is one of the most interesting cryptids to me. Now we have the bloop. So the bloop was a large noise that was recorded, I believe, in the Southern Pacific or Southern Ocean. That was, if it came from an animal, that animal was estimated to be far larger than any current animal on Earth. So currently the largest animal in the water is said to be the blue whale. I believe the bloop was about 2 to 3 times the size of a blue whale, estimation-wise. This one, I'm going to put it at A tier. While there's not really much to it besides it was never cited. I don't think it was ever recorded again. However, just the concept that there might be something in the oceans that's so much larger than anything we can comprehend is interesting to me. Now we have the alien big cats of the United Kingdom. These are said to be a collection of sightings of large big cats, so like pumas, jaguars, stuff like that, in the United Kingdom, where there are no known species of big cats to this day, are known to this day. I'm gonna put this one in B tier. Well, I think the concept of a large or group of out of place animals is interesting. The fact that the sightings are all basically just, large animals that we already know about, like, pumas or jaguars and stuff like that, to me, that's not as interesting as some of the other cryptids, it being an already known animal, even if some of the photographic evidence is compelling. Next up, we have the black shucks. So these are said to be an almost, I believe, a paranormal type of cryptid native to the UK, once again, that are said to be bearers of bad luck, described as large, even larger than normal dogs, and I believe they're even linked to curses and people dying. Normally, I'm not that much of a fan of some of the paranormal cryptids. However, some of the stories of the black shucks are super interesting to me. I think one of the best stories about the black shuck is that there was a church, I believe it's still up in England, where the church door was allegedly struck by lightning as a black shuck entered it. And I think you can still see the mark of lightning that was left, even hundreds of years afterwards. And I think that history is pretty cool. Now we have the bunyip, which is an Australian cryptid. The problem with the bunyip, to me, I'm going to put it in C tier, is that there's so many different descriptions of the bunyip. Now, there are a lot of cryptids where descriptions vary, and that's just by nature. Humans, eyewitnesses, can look at one animal and see two different things. But the bunyip itself has like just a bunch of different versions. It's been linked to a bunch of different things, from one-eyed water monsters to some type of marsupial to a man-eater. And while some of the bunyip stories are pretty cool and some of the bunyip descriptions are pretty cool, it's just hard to narrow it down as a cryptid, so I'm just going to put it in C tier. Now we have the buru. The buru is said to be a large lizard that's located in the Middle East, specifically around the Iraq region. However, the buru is now said to be extinct even by believers, as the areas that it once inhabited have dried up, mostly. I'm going to put the buru down in C tier here. There's just not a lot of information on the buru compared to other cryptids. Well, I think large lizard cryptids are interesting, especially ones found in an area as interesting as some of the deserts and valleys in Iraq. The fact that there's just almost nothing on the cryptid itself makes me put it in C tier. Now we have Caddy. So, pardon me. Caddy is said to be a ocean cryptid located off the northwest coast of North America in the Pacific Ocean. So around the western Canada and northwestern United States mostly. I'm going to put this one in B tier. I'm not sure why, but I just never got into Caddy. There are a lot of interesting stories of it. You can actually, I think Wikipedia has photos of alleged caddy specimens that were caught, but caddy itself, just as a cryptid, description-wise, isn't that cool to me, so I'm going to put it at B tier. Now we have the Yeren, or Chinese wild man. This one is basically the Chinese version of Bigfoot. Now, there are a lot of different versions of Bigfoot across the world, so it's hard for them to stand out. But I think what makes the Yeren interesting is that the Chinese government actually sponsored expeditions into Western China, the area where the urine was said to reside, to go look for the urine, which I think is pretty cool. So I'm going to put it at A tier. Now we have the chupacabra, or what's it called? Goat sucker in Spanish. Said to be originally sighted in Puerto Rico, and it's said to feed on the blood of chicken and other livestock. I've always loved the chupacabra ever since I was a kid. It was one of the first cryptids I ever found out about, and I'm going to put it in S tier. However, disclaimer, I like the reptilian kind of alien version of chupacabra. There are a lot of other different, there's not a lot, but there are some different versions of chupacabra, like one that's just said to look like a mangy dog or wolf, which I don't think is really cool. I much preferred this guy. Now we have the Dover Demon. So this was about a 3-foot or 1 meter tall animal that was sighted twice, I believe, both in one night, in Dover, Massachusetts, in the United States. As you can see here, it's said to have a bulbous head and red glowing eyes. I believe the 2 eyewitnesses cited it sitting on the side of a road and perched on a small wall. Dover Demon, to me, I'm putting it at a B tier. I think the description of the whatever it was very interesting. However, there's a lack of sightings. It was only sighted a couple times, and there's no photographic evidence of it. And both the times it was sighted, it was basically just kind of sitting there, which brings it down a little bit to me. So I'm going to put it at a B tier. Now we have the Manipogo, which is a more serpentine lake cryptid native to Canada. I'm going to put this one at a D tier. I'm just not a fan of most lake cryptids. And especially since the Manipogo is not that unique in terms of its description, I'm going to put it down a bit, or down on the tier list, because to me, lake cryptids have to stand out for them to be interesting. Just because if you really look into lake cryptids, there are dozens to hundreds of different lake cryptid sightings and creatures, and most of the lake cryptids either are kind of Loch Ness Monster inspired, like plesiosaurs, or they're these serpentine type of lake cryptids like the Manipogo. So I'm going to put that one down in D. Now we have the Orang Pendek. This is said to be one of, if not the most likely cryptids to be found, likely ape cryptids to be found. It's a shorter than an average human ape cryptid native to Indonesia. While I do, again, as with all cryptids, hope it gets found, or most cryptids, I hope it gets found, but I'm going to put this at C tier just because the description of the animal isn't that, it's basically just kind of an orangutan. And the sightings of the animal don't describe it doing anything, that out of the blue either. It just seems like a normal ape. So I'm going to put it at C tier. Now we have the Loveland frog. So this one was sighted a couple times in Loveland, Ohio, and it was described as a large upright walking frog. Pretty out there cryptid. However, it does get bonus points because I believe in one sighting, they described it as holding some type of sparkler in its hand, or glowing stick or something like that, which is pretty interesting, so I'm going to put it at A tier. Now we have the Enfield Horror. So this one was sighted in the 1970s, if I remember right, and it's described as a pale white, 3-legged, red-eyed creature. It was sighted in a time span of like a week or 2 weeks by a few different people a few different times, and the Enfield Horror was said to be able to jump like long distances, like 20 to 30 feet or 10 meters-ish, at least, in a single bound. I'm going to put this one at A tier as well, because it was sighted a couple times in that time span, and there are some interesting stories about it too. Like one guy alleges to have shot it, and the bullets had no effect. And I believe somewhere out there, there's an alleged audio recording that was from the Enfield horror by a couple of men who were tracking it, which I hope someday that comes out because it sounds like it would be interesting. Now we have the giant Ethiopian lizard. So I would put it down here at like a C tier because it is basically just a larger than normal lizard. But the story behind this one is so interesting, I'm going to put it at A tier. So the story from the giant Ethiopian lizard actually comes to us from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books. He was relayed this story from a hunter in Ethiopia who apparently came across the giant Ethiopian lizard one day while hunting. And the hunter in his story relayed that he didn't shoot the creature because since it was the only time in all his years hunting that he ever saw one, he figured that it was extremely rare and even killing one of them could be dangerous for the species overall. And I think that story is extremely interesting. I really like that detail, so I'm going to put it at A tier. Now we have the Ohio Grassman. So the Ohio Grassman is said to be sort of a regional variant of Bigfoot. More like Bigfoot description-wise, a tall, hairy ape man. However, the Ohio Grassman is said to be more violent than Bigfoot, attacking people, throwing stones, and stuff like that. While some of the aggressive stories behind the Grassman are interesting, I just don't think it's unique enough to stand out from Bigfoot, so I'm going to put it at a B tier. Now we have Flessie, or the Flathead Lake Monster. This is an example of a lake cryptid that I actually think is kind of interesting. The reason is that the Flathead Lake Monster has quite a history of sightings, dating back over 100 years. The first sighting that I could find was also extremely interesting because 100 people plus that were all on a boat together reported seeing the creature. They even described it as a sort of whale-like object in the water. Now that's pretty unique as far as lake cryptids go. Most of them are not described as whale-like, so I'm going to put that one at A tier. Now we have the Fresno Nightcrawlers. These ones were, I think it was a security camera that captured them, but they became viral after a video of the Fresno Nightcrawlers, which kind of resemble two pairs of walking pants, were recorded walking across a field. Just the fact that these guys look like walking pants makes them an instant S tier. No other comment. The Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins. These ones have an interesting story. So they were only ever sighted once, and during that sighting, they descended upon a house that was housing a family or two families for dinner. The goblins then proceeded to, over the next few hours, torment the family. They would float around the house, they would peer in and scare the children, and when the men in the house took out guns and fired at them, every time they hit, the goblins simply backflipped and floated away, apparently impervious to the firearms. The fact that these guys were only sighted once, the rather odd siege and very interesting story of the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins makes me put them at S tier, even if the goblins themselves kind of look goofy. Now we have giant snakes. This specifically is a photo of the 50-foot Congo snake. Giant snakes, I'm going to put at D tier. I think giant cryptids can be interesting, but to me, giant snakes just aren't that interesting. Most of the stories of giant snakes also I don't find very interesting either. It's just a snake that's larger than normal snakes are. Now we have the Tatzelworm. This one I'm going to put... This is a worm-like cryptid, or snake-like cryptid, reported in the Alps region of Europe, so Switzerland, Italy, Austria, and France. This one I'm going to put at B tier, because there's a good history behind the Tatzelworm. There's reports going back hundreds of years. However, the tatzelworm itself kind of changes descriptions a lot. Sometimes it's a shortish worm or snake-like creature. Sometimes it's this giant upright walking thing with a cat-like face that has poisonous breath. So I'm going to put it at B tier just because some of the descriptions of it are pretty out there. Now we have a Momo, or the Missouri Monster. Momo was first sighted, I think the first sighting was when he was spotted walking into a backyard of a suburban home carrying a dog in one of his arms. Now, children were actually playing in the yard at the time, so the terrified mother spotted Momo and then quickly ushered the children inside. After that initial sighting, there were a few more within that time span, and then after that, infrequent sightings over the years. Momo I'm putting at C tier because while some of the stories are cool, Momo itself I just don't think is that distinct from Bigfoot, which knocks it down some tiers. Then we have the Cleary's fish, which I'm going to put at A tier. So Mike Cleary, I should say, is the diver that was the sole eyewitness of Cleary's fish. So he was diving, I believe it was in between Japan and the Philippines, and he was hundreds of feet and hundreds of meters underwater when he spotted a long, I think it was like 30 to 40 feet or 10 to 12 meter long fish in the water. Now, not only would this be an absolutely astonishingly large creature, but he also said that it had 2 pairs of limbs, something that is found in some fish. However, all of those fish are way shorter than what Cleary was describing. I'm putting it at A tier because although the sighting itself is really interesting, the fact that it was found, so deep underwater, the description of it just seems a little not that interesting, unfortunately, to me. Although the presence of the limbs is cool, it's a little bit out there. Then we have the Jabba Fofi. This is a species of giant spiders that are found in Central Africa. I'm putting it at C tier again because I think that giant animal cryptids are sometimes just not that interesting. However, the Jabba Fofi has a couple of interesting sightings itself. I think one of them was where an expedition in Central Africa came across a Jabba Fofi and was ambushed by it, and I think it even killed 1 or 2 of the members. Not something that's common in cryptid reports, so I'm putting that at a C tier. Then we have the Jersey Devil, said to be a flying horse-like creature native to New Jersey in the United States. While the winged horse description of the Jersey Devil makes me put it down a few tiers because it's just so ridiculous and out there, I do respect the Jersey Devil because of the immense history and folklore behind the cryptid. There's been reports going back to hundreds of years, and it's become extremely intertwined within the folklore of New Jersey, with dozens of stories, sightings, some of which are interesting, so I'm putting that one at B tier. Now we have the Kongamato. The Kongamato is a pterodactyl-like cryptid that's noted for digging up and eating the bodies at human graveyards. That one's pretty metal, so I'm going to put it at A tier. Now we have Champ. Now, Champ normally is a cryptid I would put towards the bottom of the tier list just because it's kind of a ripoff of the Loch Ness Monster in terms that most of the sightings describe a plesiosaur-like creature, and there's nothing else that interesting about it. However, I'm putting Champ at A tier because of the existence of the Bidet of Folter film, which I've covered on this channel before. Now, the Bidet of Folter film is a video that allegedly shows Champ. However, the only clip we have from the Bidet of Folter film is about 5 to 8 seconds long, and it doesn't show that much of the monster. However, There is a longer cut of the video that allegedly shows an in-detailed uh, image of Champ, but the current owner of the video, which I believe is a copyright lawyer, refuses to release the video unless he gets paid a lot of money, like tens of thousands of dollars. Because of the existence of that video, which I think is a really cool story, I'm putting Champ at A. Now we have the Lusca. This is a giant octopus that's said to live in the Bahamian blue holes area, which are kind of large sinkholes in the ocean. And it's most noted for allegedly preying on, attacking, and eating divers in the area. This one might be controversial because I know there are a lot of fans of the Lusca, but I'm going to put it at B tier. While it would be very terrifying to come across an octopus diving, which I think diving already is a pretty scary pastime, the Lusca itself is just a giant octopus. There's not much more to it, and there are a lot of sightings of the giant octopus, but in terms of the Lusca actually preying on people, I haven't heard that many interesting stories, so I'm gonna put it at B tier. Now we have the Mapinguari, which is a South American cryptid, specifically in the Brazilian rainforest and surrounding countries' rainforests. This one I'm putting at S tier. Giant ground sloths, which are theorized and widely believed to be the animal behind the Mapinguari sightings, are an extremely cool extinct animal. And I love them. I hope they exist somewhere. I'm putting them at S tier. Then we have the Lake Van monster. This is said to be a cryptid in Lake Van, which is found in Turkey. I'm putting this one at C tier. The only reason I don't put it a little bit lower is that there's at least one story of the Lake Van monster attacking and I think pulling somebody out of the water, out of land, or into the water, and then killing them. Which again, isn't something that's that common in cryptid reports, which makes me put it at a C tier. Next up, we have the Megalania, which is a giant lizard cryptid from Oceania. The Megalania was actually a real animal, I should mention, and it was said to have gone extinct many years ago. However, like a lot of cryptids, there are still some reports of it still being out there. I'm gonna put this one at B tier. There are a couple of interesting stories. I think my favorite one was when there was a group of men going down a river on a boat when one of the men spotted something and they looked at it, and it was a giant Megalania, a giant lizard sitting on top of a tree, I think a fallen tree. And the men were on the boat. It was traveling downstream, so they couldn't exactly stop. And that story kind of piqued my interest. I thought that one was interesting, so I'm putting it at B. Now we have the Mabilu, which is another Central African cryptid said to be mostly aquatic, with usually only the back and eyes of the creature sticking out of the water. This one is said to have moss grown on its back, which I think is a cool detail, and some link it to being a surviving stegosaurus as well. I'm putting it at A tier. I think the mostly aquatic nature of the Mabilu is pretty interesting. The Megalodon is a cryptid I'm going to put at A here. So, I said before that I don't really like cryptids that are just giant versions of animals we already know do exist. But with the Megalodon, at least, I think that maybe it's just because I like the movie Jaws, but sharks are a bit cooler than snakes or spiders. And I especially like that Megalodon sightings have the benefit of being in the ocean as opposed to on land, just because I think ocean cryptids are more fascinating usually than some land cryptids. Now the Mokele Mbembe. However you pronounce it, I am a big fan of this one. I'm putting this guy in S tier. I love the name of the creature. I believe it's supposed to translate to the one who stops the flow of rivers. I love the history of sightings. I love the debates around what it is. Some people say it's a dinosaur. Some people, of course, say it isn't real. Some say it's potentially an undiscovered type of lizard or mammal. And the sightings themselves are also pretty cool. Definitely an S tier cryptid. Now we have the Mingwa, another S tier cryptid. So this was a cryptid reported in the early 1900s in Tanzania, I believe, that was said to attack humans, even killing some of the people that were supposed to hunt the creature. Mingwa attacks were reported at night, and in one of the more interesting reports, one of the local constables who was set out to protect a market at night was found clutching gray hairs in his hand after his body was found, after the Mingwa presumably killed him. I love the stories of man-eaters, man-eating animals. Like, the most famous ones are the man-eating lions of Tsavo. So the Mingwa definitely gets put in S tier here. Now we have the Monkey Man of New Delhi, I believe. This one, I think I'm going to put it in A tier. Very odd cryptid. If you're unfamiliar, the Monkey Man of New Delhi it's said to be a type of, I forget what the name is, but it's a phenomenon in which widespread hysteria. Basically, reports of a smallish monkey man creature began circulating in New Delhi, and that caused huge panics around. There were reports of it attacking people, scratching people. You can kind of see it in this photo, but there was even a report of the monkey man wearing like human clothes and a helmet. Anyway, it is a pretty fascinating cryptid. Even if it is just a weird looking monkey, especially because of the sort of psychological component behind this one, because I believe people even were unfortunately killed when there were stampedes relating to people trying to escape the monkey man, which isn't something that's found in a lot of cryptids. Now we have Mothman, S tier cryptid. Mothman, believe in them, don't believe in them, but the story of a giant moth-like creature chasing people around West Virginia is insanely cool. I am a huge fan of the Mothman story. The theories of, is it an alien? Was it a military science experiment? And I especially like the sort of mythos that has been built around Mothman, where Mothman has become a symbol or a warning of some dangerous thing about to happen. Very cool cryptid, definitely an S tier. Now we have the skunk ape. I'm going to put this one up here in S tier. Normally, when it comes to, I don't want to say rip-offs, but like Bigfoot variants, a lot of them are too similar to Bigfoot for me to really enjoy them as like a distinct thing. But I like that skunk ape is said to A, have a very distinctive smell to them, smelling like a skunk, and B, living in the swamps of Florida, which I think is a pretty unique habitat for a cryptid. So I'm putting that one in S tier. And also the alleged photo of the skunk ape, I kind of cut it off, but you can see it here. I've always thought that was a pretty cool photo, hoax or not, which definitely helps my ranking of the skunk ape. Then the bathysphere creatures, instant S tier. I absolutely love the bathysphere creatures. I love that they were only ever cited once. I love that they were cited by a very prominent and very famous scientist. And I love the sort of story where humans brush up against something that they've never brushed up before. Because if you're not familiar with the story, the bathysphere fish are a group of 5 species that were sighted during some early deep-sea expeditions in the 1930s. to me, that is just an awesome cryptid. Something that the first time humans are really seeing this new layer, new corner of the earth, thousands of feet beneath the surface, to see species that haven't been seen since. I just think that's an absolutely cool story and one of the most meaningful things in cryptozoology. Next up is the Oklahoma octopus. This one, I'm putting an A tier. For one, it is basically just an octopus. A giant version of an octopus, which, as I said before, I don't really like them as cryptids. However, the Oklahoma octopus is just so bizarre as a story. For it to be an alleged freshwater octopus, which there aren't any on Earth that we've discovered so far. B, it living in man-made lakes. It's only ever been reported in 3 man-made lakes that were created in the 1950s. So however it would have gotten in them is unknown. And then the sort of scary aspect of, there's a man-eating octopus in the lakes all these people swim at, I think is a cool story for a cryptid to have. The Oletiao is described as a large bat-like cryptid that's known for being aggressive and attacking people. I'm putting this one in C tier because it's essentially just a giant bat cryptid, and there's not much that really makes it much cooler than some of the other, giant bat cryptids out there. Some of the stories of explorers being attacked and swooped down by the Oletiao are pretty cool, but other than that, there's not much for the cryptid that makes it interesting to me. Then we have Montegori's monstrous fish, which was described as basically a large whale that was sighted near southern Italy. This one I'm putting in D tier just because there's not a lot of details we have on the cryptid. There's no special behavior that was exhibited by the cryptid that was reported, so there's not really much to go off of for it. Then there is the Morosi. So this is allegedly a species of spotted lion. Now, as far as I know, no known species of lion has spots in adulthood, and these were allegedly fully grown lions that were found with spots. I'm putting this one in S tier for this. While they are a cool cryptid, I think they're extremely cool because there are skins of the Morosi. They were collected and shot, and I believe there were even some recent-ish scientific inquiries, or at least examinations of the Morosi pelt. I believe I saw one on Twitter, so that's pretty cool. The Gloucester sea serpent. I'm gonna put this one in D. It's a very famous cryptid and very notable for the fact that I think hundreds of people are said to have sighted it, but I'm not sure why. I just never was interested in this cryptid whatsoever. Maybe it's because it's basically just a sea serpent with nothing else really interesting about it. I think the only unique-ish detail is that some people thought they saw a barb or a horn type thing sticking out of its head. But regardless, I was just not a fan of the cryptid. Now we have the Ropin, the flying pterodactyl-like creature of New Guinea. I'm putting this one at S tier. I like the sort of living dinosaur pterodactyl aspect that the Ropin is described as being, and I also really like the fact that the Ropin is said to be bioluminescent. I think it's very cool and especially interesting because, as far as I know, no flying creatures have bioluminescence, at least that we know of so far. So that one's getting an S rating. Now we have the naked bear. So these were a species of bear that were said to be mostly hairless, besides some hair, I think, on the hind legs of the animal. I'm putting them in C tier because besides them being hairless bears, there's not that much interesting about them. One thing I did like is that the the naked bears were said to have gone extinct by the time uh I'm sorry, I should say that the naked bears were reported in North America, specifically the New York area, and by the time Europeans and the outside world had traveled to North America, the natives there had said that the naked bear was already extinct, which I think is pretty interesting. So that at least gets it a C tier. Now we have the Nandi bear. Big fan of this cryptid. There are a ton of sightings of it, or a ton of recorded sightings of the Nandi bear. The description of the animal itself is also pretty cool. It being, depending on who you talk to, some sort of giant baboon or bear-like animal. The aggressive behavior of the Nandi bear is pretty cool. And then there are also a lot of stories of hunters brushing up against or even killing Nandi bears before, which I think is interesting. In fact, floating out there somewhere are alleged Nandi bear specimens, which is pretty cool. Now we have the Alvin sea serpent. This one is also getting an S tier rating. Big fan of this, as you can tell by my placement of the bathysphere fish. I am a sucker for any cryptid that is a deep sea underwater animal. I think it's super interesting whenever we have cryptids reported from areas that, only a few humans in the course of humanity's entire history has ever gone down to. Not to mention the fact that the Alvin sea serpent itself is very interesting description-wise, and it can lead to a lot of debates over what exactly the man who reported it saw that day. The Tra-Tra-Tra-Tra, or giant lemur of Madagascar, is a pretty interesting cryptid. I'm going to give it a A rating here. What I like about it is that even though it's basically just a giant lemur, the sightings of the Tra-Tra-Tra-Tra have gone back to, I believe, the 1650s. So having a cryptid with that long of a history of sightings is pretty interesting. Even, as I said before, if the cryptid is basically just a giant lemur. Then we have the Deep Star 4000 fish, named after the Deep Star 4000 submersible that first sighted it. This one, definitely an S tier cryptid. As I've said before with the Alvin and bathysphere fish, I'm just a huge fan of deep sea cryptids. I love that there are unidentified animals in areas that only dozens or hundreds of people in all of human history have explored and been to. I think that's extremely interesting for cryptids, and definitely one of the future frontiers where we're going to be finding a lot of new animals. Then we have the Amila natuka. This is an African cryptid described as basically an aquatic rhinoceros. I'm putting this one at A tier just because I really like rhinoceroses, and for there to potentially be a species of rhinoceros that's semi or mostly aquatic would be pretty interesting. We have the Dobhar Chew. I pronounced that wrong for sure. But this was basically a giant Irish otter cryptid. I was a big fan of the Dobhar Chew ever since I was a kid, so I'm putting that one in the A tier. One of the interesting things about it is that it's said to attack humans. I think there's even a gravestone of a woman who was allegedly killed by a Dobhar Chew, dragging her underwater, if I remember correctly. Either way, interesting cryptid, and it's from an area that you don't really see a lot of cryptids from, which is cool as well. Next, we have the long-necked sea serpent, or the long-necked seal. This one, I'm going to give it a B tier. While I think the concept of a long-necked seal is interesting, the sightings themselves just aren't that interesting to me. With the exception of the Alvin sea serpent sighting, most of the long-necked sightings are just don't have that much that stick out to me, that interest me. Actually, I'm putting it up here at A tier. I did forget that there was allegedly a long-necked seal that was not captured, but a long-necked seal that was preserved all the way back in the 1600s and 1700s that was later lost. Whatever that seal skin was, I think that was a pretty interesting historical mystery. And if it really did belong to the long-necked seal, that would also be a big find if it ever came out. Then we have the Dusky Sound Beast. This one was basically said to be a giant kangaroo, I think about 18 to 20 feet or 6-ish meters tall, that was sighted once by a group of sailors off the coast of New Zealand. This one was allegedly kind of sitting on the shoreline and had an absolutely huge jump to it. The sailors spotted it for a little bit before it retreated out of sight. I don't know why, but even though it's basically just a giant kangaroo, I really liked this cryptid. I'm going to put it at S tier. Maybe it's because it was only ever sighted by a single group of people, but it just always interested me as a historical story. Then we have the Boston lemur. This was a lemur that was basically sighted in Boston. The guy who sighted it actually checked to see if there were any escaped lemurs from nearby zoos, but they were not. If I remember correctly, he describes the story as he was walking home one day. He actually worked with one of the Boston sports team, I think the baseball team, and he spotted a lemur that was using its tail to balance on the road before the lemur ran out of sight. This one was also interesting because I believe one of my viewers also commented that they had seen a lemur in the Boston area as well. So I'm putting that one in the S tier, around the same time as this sighting. Then we have the Ting Vor, which is said to be a type of buffalo or cow that feeds on venomous snakes. This one I'm gonna give a rating. The concept of a type of cow that feeds on venomous snakes is pretty metal, but some of the stories behind the Ting Vor just don't interest me as much as other cryptids do. So I'm going to put it at an A here. The Beast of Bray Road. One of my favorite cryptids. I'm putting that one in S tier. While it's basically just a werewolf in terms of its description, what I like about the Beast of Bray Road is that it's named after a pretty random road that it's said to hang out at, Bray Road, obviously. Why there's a giant dogman creature hanging out in a random road in Wisconsin, I don't know, but it makes for a pretty interesting and fun cryptid concept. Then we have the Fisher Pig. I'm going to put this one in A tier. I like that the Fisher Pig, first of all, is located in Central Europe, I think near Hungary, because that's just an area where there's not a lot of cryptids in general. And then B, the reason I really like the Fisher Pig is that it's said to be a type of pig that literally fishes for fish in rivers and feeds off them. That's pretty funny mental picture. Next up is the Tan Kong, which is a guinea cryptid described as a zebra with fangs. I'm putting that one in C tier because while it's an interesting mental picture, there's not really much else to the cryptid besides that. Then there's the bat-winged monkey bird. This is a type of bird in the southern United Kingdom that's said to be a bat-winged monkey bird. I think all of the sightings actually were by one individual too over the course of many years. While the fantastic description of the cryptid is pretty cool, the sightings themselves aren't really anything special to me, so I'm going to put it in B tier. Next is the many-finned sea serpent. This is a part of the Hoovelman system, which if you're not, the Hoovelman sea serpent system, which if you're not familiar is like a classification system based on a bunch of sightings of unidentified sea cryptids around the world. This one, I'm just not a fan of. There's just not much interesting about it to me. The design of it, the description of it is kind of cool, but other than that, most of the sightings I've read for the creature aren't that interesting, so I'm putting it in C tier. Then we have the Lao, which is said to be a giant Sudanese fish that uses the barbs on the side of its mouth to catch and eat prey. This one, pretty interesting. I'm a fan of it. I'm going to put it in B tier. Next up, we have the dodo. Not the dodo, the dodo. These are a species of diminutive, small ape-like creatures that are said to inhabit Western Africa. What I like about these is the bizarre way they supposedly catch their prey. Not catch their prey, but attract their prey. What they're said to do is kill an animal, then leave it to rot, and then feed on the maggots that infest the rotting animal. Absolutely disgusting way of eating, but it makes for an interesting cryptid, so I'm putting that at S tier. Now is the Yingkou falling dragon incident. This was said to be a literal dragon in China in the 1930s, I believe it was when it was sighted, that showed up during a hot day. The villagers noticed the creature. They noticed that it was kind of ailing, so I believe they threw buckets of water on it until it managed to go back into the river. And then, according to some versions of the story, it later showed up, thrashed about, killed like 6 people, and then was finally found dying in some reeds. This is just an interesting story from a historical perspective, especially since the specimen was partially preserved and photographed. There's, unfortunately, in English, the amount of information we have for the cryptid is very limited, since most of it is Google translated articles, which aren't that great of a source of information for it. However, I do really like the story, so I'm putting it in S tier. Then we have Marvin, the unidentified animal that was filmed off the coast of California in 1962. Another S tier cryptid. I love that this one was apparently filmed by like an underwater robot, like a drone, during the drone's expedition to find oil deposits. This one, like the Deep Star 4000 fish, I like because it was filmed in an area that most people don't go down to. It wasn't quite filmed at such depth as deep as the Alvin or the Bathysphere fish. However, it is still pretty interesting, and the description, what you can see of the creature itself, is also really cool. It kind of looks like a tentacle from an octopus, but it's detached from the body. That I really like about the cryptid, so I'm putting it in S tier. Next up is the U85. Sorry, no, this is the USS Stein, unidentified creature, which I'm putting in S tier. The story behind this guy is that the USS Stein, which was a destroyer, was attacked by some sort of unknown species of squid that was apparently, according to some estimates, larger than any known species of squid that we knew of in the 1970s when it first happened and know of today. While obviously the size of whatever attacked it is in dispute, I think it's a pretty interesting story, so I'm putting it at S. Then we have the man seals, which are a group of seal-like creatures with man-like faces that I think were in the northwestern coast of North America in the Pacific Ocean. These ones, while they are a pretty cool description-wise for a cryptid, The stories of the cryptids themselves aren't really anything interesting. There's no, there's no interesting behavior about them in the sightings, so I'm gonna stick them in B tier. The Shunka Warakin, or carrier off of dogs, I believe it translates to, is like a hyena type creature that was located in the northwestern United States. This one has always been pretty interesting to me. I'm going to put it in A tier, especially because there have been alleged Shunka Warakins that were shot and preserved. Now, I don't believe any of these studies on them have ever determined that the Shunkawarakan is actually a new species. I believe one of these studies came back that one of the alleged Shunkawarakans was just a dog. However, regardless, I still think it's a pretty interesting cryptid, and I like the aspect that some of them were shot and taxidermied. Then we have the telepathic football. This one has an interesting story where two boys came across what looked like a floating dog-like creature, and then one of the boys in his head heard a voice that told them to run, and obviously they ran afterwards. That one's going in S tier. It's just a really goofy creature, and I love it. Stellar's Sea Ape is a cryptid I'm a big fan of. I'm putting it in S tier. So Stellar's Sea Ape was cited by George Stellar initially, who was also responsible for a couple other cryptids, and he described the animal as basically a seal, but with a dog-like head and a rather playful demeanor, rather playful behavior it exhibited. It would like swim up to the ship, disappear into water, and kind of play with the men on the ship, which I think is a interesting angle for the cryptid. He described it, I think, as being somewhat monkey-like in the way it behaves. Unfortunately, if I remember the story correctly, some of the men, or even George himself, tried to like shoot the creature after it was like playing with them. Thankfully, they missed, and the animal escaped, but that is kind of a bummer aspect to the story. The Storgeret, which I did not pronounce correctly, is a Swedish lake cryptid that I'm going to give a D here. Obviously, it's a lake cryptid, which usually I'm not a fan of unless there's something about them that's interesting or unique, and there's just nothing about the Storgeret that's interesting or unique to me, besides it being found in a region without a lot of cryptids. Additionally, while this doesn't affect its rating, when I first reported on the Storgeret, I spent hours trying to figure out how to pronounce it correctly. I ended up listening to a Swedish newscast, which I did not understand a word of, to try and find how they pronounced the name of the lake, Lake Sturgeon, I think it's called, that the Storgeret lives in, and then I tried to turn that pronunciation into the Storgeret. It did not turn out well, but putting that one in a D. Then we have the super eel. While it is, basically just a giant version of a eel, I'm putting the super eel in a A tier. One of the channel favorites. The super eel is one of the Huvemann's types of sea serpents, like the long neck or many-finned sea serpent. And I just like eels. I like the concept that there are giant 40-foot eels swimming out there too. There is one interesting eel story where they actually captured what was supposedly a baby super eel. What happened was they captured a eel in a larva state, so basically like a baby eel, and they estimated that had that eel grown up, it would have been far larger than any currently known type of eel. That story is pretty interesting, so I'm putting that one in A. Now we have the Trinity Alps giant salamander. This one is going in C. While it is basically just a giant salamander, again, one of the giant cryptids, which I'm not a fan of, some of the stories of encounters with the Trinity Alps giant salamander are sort of interesting. I like one where a man apparently found an entire group of them in a remote lake in the Trinity Alps region. However, they're just not that interesting to me. The tailed slow loris, instantly S tier, one of my all-time favorite cryptids. I love the story of a group of scientists capturing an entirely new species and then basically not locking the cage out of laziness and letting the new species escape. Probably the funniest cryptid story as well. I just love these guys. Then we have the Thunderbird. This one's going in S tier. This one, again, a giant version of a cryptid. Basically, the Thunderbird is a giant bird. However, with the mystery of the Thunderbird photo, which I find extremely interesting, and some of these stories of Thunderbirds attacking and picking up people for short distances, I think both of those things are very interesting. So I'm putting it in the S tier. The thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, also going in S tier. This is another one of those species that we know existed, however, is now considered extinct by scientists, and there's some debate over whether or not they are actually extinct. The thylacine is one of the most iconic cryptids and iconic extinct animals, and I do hope they are out there somewhere. The years of debate, the years of hunts for the thylacine, and the amount of alleged photographic evidence for the thylacine is all very interesting to me, and I am a fan of them. I do hope they are out there. Next up is the Timor Sea ground shark. This one is just funny to me. I'm putting it at S. I don't know a ton about the cryptid, but allegedly it's a type of shark that lives on the ground of the ocean and just waits for people to come across it before it surprises them. It supposedly blends into the seafloor, which is how it ambushes prey. Just a funny cryptid. I kind of love this drawing of it. It looks very out there. Big fan, putting it in an S tier. Also going in S tier, the Tuchinoko, or fat snake of Japan. I love these guys. Iconic cryptid, 10 out of 10. So this cryptid, Mossman, I'm gonna put this one in an A tier. It's essentially just described as a unknown, unidentified type of bipedal humanoid that's been sighted in the United States, and it's distinguished by the fact that it's said to have moss growing off of it, or on it. I don't know why, I just think the concept of a living ghillie suit is pretty cool, so I'm going to put it in A tier. Kind of like the Mobilu, which apparently sometimes has plants growing on the back of it. Next up is the U-28 sea monster. Classic cryptid story. If you don't know, this cryptid was allegedly sighted after a U-boat exploded during World War I, if I remember correctly. And the explosion of the U-boat apparently sent a mosasaur-like creature soaring into the air for a few seconds before it disappeared under the ocean waters, never to be seen again. I love that story. I love the one-off nature of it. I think it's somewhat similar to some of the other cryptids here, like the alvin and the deep starfish, in that it had, a singular sighting in an area that most people wouldn't have traveled again. Then we have the warrigal. This is an alleged saber-toothed big cat in Australia. I'm gonna put this one in B. I think saber-toothed cats still being around would be extremely cool. However, the warrigal stories, the encounters with the warrigals, the reports of the warrigals, just aren't that interesting to me as much as some of the other cryptids up here. Then is Amphireliath Moor, or the Big Gray Man of Ben Macdui. This one is basically a large, hairy, Bigfootish-like creature that is reported in the United Kingdom. Apparently, it stalks people on a mountain, and that's basically it. It's described more as like a specter than a living animal, so it would probably fall more under like a folklore categorization. However, I really like the stories of it. There are one encounter, a man described having walking across the mountain, having a distinct feeling that something was following him. He turned around and he could kind of see something in the fog, which is super creepy. I love it. It's going in A tier. The Yeti, S tier cryptid. I love the Yeti. I loved the Yeti ever since I was a kid and saw Monsters Inc., I think, had the abominable snowman in it. Very random cryptid cameo. But I do like the concept of some unidentified large animal living in the Himalayan mountain regions, which I'm also a fan of geographically. And whether or not it's a bear or a Bigfoot or whatever, cool cryptid. It's very famous for a good reason. Then we have Giggly Ogie's whale. I probably flubbed the name on that one too. This was a whale that was first sighted off the coast of Chile. Apparently, it swam so close to the ship that the eyewitnesses were on that they couldn't fire at it with cannons. However, that allowed the guy on the ship to take detailed drawings of the whale, and it's been sighted a few times since then. Unfortunately, it is basically just a new type of whale. It didn't really have any interesting descriptions to it, so I'm going to put it in C tier. Then we have the Yowie. This might be controversial, but I really do not like the Yowie at all. It just seems like a Australian Bigfoot ripoff to me. There are some cool stories of the Yowie, of it chasing people. There was a random spree of tusked Yowie sightings that I've also covered on my channel before, where people cited a Yowie with tusks for some reason. But it does kind of seem like a Bigfoot ripoff, and I think some people have even accused it of being a direct Bigfoot ripoff, as in people, some early Yowie eyewitnesses or investigators kind of concocted a story of an Australian Bigfoot. Unfortunately, I'm going to put it in C tier. Finally, we have the Yukon Beaver Eaters. These are basically, if you remember up top, the Mapinguari of South America, where it's described as a giant ground sloth that survived into the modern times. The Saytochin or Yukon Beaver Eaters are basically giant ground sloths that live in northern Canada. These ones I'm also a big fan of. There's a super interesting story I read on one where it basically chased after some people through a forest in Canada. And yeah, I'm a very big sucker for giant ground sloth cryptids, so I'm putting that one in S tier as well. So going through and editing the video, I realized that I missed the Mongolian deathworm, which I'm going to put at A. Mongolian deathworm was one of my favorite cryptids as a kid. However, kid me also thought that it was like a giant worm, the size of some of the larger, like a giant anaconda or something like that. However, they're only described as being like 3 feet or a meter-ish long, which although they're still a cool cryptid, it's kind of a letdown for adult cryptozoologists to me. That's the end of this video. Thank you for watching and listening to me ramble through all these cryptids. I appreciate you sticking around to watch the video. This was quite a lot of fun to make. If you want to make your own list, I will have a link to this tier list page in the description of the video. I'll also link my other social media accounts, Patreon, Twitter, that stuff in the description as well. If you're unfamiliar with some of these cryptids, you want a refresher, I do have a series called the Cryptid Iceberg that I will leave a link to in the description as well. If you haven't already seen that, check it out because it either covers already all of the cryptids in this video, or I will cover the rest of the cryptids that aren't in this video, that are in this chart in a future video sometime. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. If you want to leave a list of your favorite cryptids in the description, just leave a comment. I would appreciate it as well. If you have any disagreements with me, you think I'm too harsh on a cryptid, or you think I have too high of an opinion on a cryptid, also leave that in the description as well. Though this is just my opinion, disclaimer. That's all for this video. If you're watching this on Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving, and I will see you in the next one.